And now I'm going to push the share screen. And here we go. So this is a story from Rav Nachman of Bratslav. We've had stories of his before, you may remember. And I'm going to get rid of this stuff if it gets in. So can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay. So it's called The Emperor and the King. It's actually, it's quite an extraordinary story. It's a real swashbuckler. And we'll begin today. It's a lengthy story. We'll see how far we get. Maybe we'll finish it, maybe not. Okay, so do we need to get it a little bigger? How's that?
Now you can't see it all. It was best.
I know.
It was better before.
I'm going to open the window a little more here. What happens if you go like, no? So
It was better before, Rabbi.
it was?
Yeah. Do you
All
agree,
right.
John?
Yeah,
There
there you go.
you go. Okay.
Just move it over a little.
So we need somebody who can be with us the whole time and read this as far as we go. Okay, John, it's all yours.
A tale. Once there was an emperor. The emperor had no children.
In the original, they tell you that the word emperor is a Kaiser, coming from the word Caesar, a Caesar, like a Kaiser.
Like Kaiser in German.
Right.
The emperor had no children, and there was also one king. The king also had no children. The emperor let himself wander the earth searching. Perhaps he would find some solution or treatment so that he would have children. The king also let himself travel the world. The two of them came together at one inn, and they did not recognize each other. The emperor recognized in the king that he had royal mannerisms, and he asked him, and he acknowledged to him that he was a king. The king also recognized in the emperor that he had royal customs, and he also acknowledged it to him. They told each other that they were traveling for children. They enacted between them if they would come home and their wives would bear one a boy and one a girl, they would match them. The emperor traveled home and had a daughter, and the king traveled home and had a son, and the match was forgotten by them. The emperor sent his daughter to study. The king also sent his son to study. They both arrived at the same teacher. They liked each other very much. They agreed between themselves to marry each other. The prince took a ring and placed it on her hand, and they were espoused. The separation. Afterwards, the emperor sent for his daughter and brought her home.
All of these titles, these little section titles, are not in the original story. That's why they're in brackets.
Oh, okay. Afterward, the emperor sent for his daughter and brought her home. The king also sent for his son and also brought him home. Matches were suggested for the emperor's daughter, but she was not interested in any match on account of the bond she already had made with the king's son. The king's son yearned for her greatly, and the emperor's daughter was also constantly sad. The emperor would walk her through his courtyards and palace, showing her greatness, but she was always sad. The king's son yearned for her so much that he became ill, and no matter how much he was asked, "Why are you ill?" he did not want to say. They asked the one who served him, "Maybe you can clarify by him." He answered them, "I know."
This is a Yiddish English.
He answered them, "I know, because the one who served him was with him there where he learned." He told them, that is, the servant told him why he was sick. The king remembered that he had already long ago made a match with the emperor, so he went and wrote to the emperor that he should prepare himself for the wedding. For the match had indeed been made long ago, as mentioned, and the emperor no longer wanted the match, but he could not brazenly refuse. The emperor wrote that the king should send his son to him in order for him to see if he could rule countries. Then he would give him his daughter. The king sent his son to him. The emperor sat him down in a room and gave him papers of government matters in order to see if he could lead a country. The king's son was deeply yearning to see her, but he could not see her. One time, while he was walking along a wall of mirror, he saw her and he fainted. She came to him and roused him, and she told him that she does not want any other match because of the bond she already had with him. He said to her, "What can we do? Your father does not want it." She said, nevertheless, she would save herself just for him. Then they took counsel. They would let themselves go by sea. So they rented a ship and set out to sea. They traveled on the sea. Afterwards, they wanted to come ashore, and they came ashore. There was a forest there, and they went into it. The emperor's daughter took the ring and gave it to him, and she lay down to sleep. Afterward, the king's son saw she would soon get up, so he put the ring next to her. Then they went to the ship. It's hard to follow that. Meanwhile, she remembered that they had forgotten the ring there, so she sent him after the ring. He went there, but could not find the place. He went further and still could not find the ring. He went, seeking the ring from one place to another place until he got lost and was unable to return. She went looking for him, and she too got lost. He was going along and getting further and further astray. Then he saw a path, and he entered a settled area. He had nothing to do, so he became a servant. She too went and got lost. She decided she would sit by the sea. She went to the shore of the sea, and there were fruit trees there. She settled there, and during the day she would go along the sea. Perhaps she would find some passerby. And she sustained herself on the fruit. And at night she would climb up a tree to be protected from wild beasts. The day came to pass when there was a big merchant, a very big merchant, who had commerce throughout the entire world. And he had an only son. And the merchant was now old. Once the son said to his father, "Being that you're already old and I'm still very young, and your trustees do not supervise me whatsoever, what will happen? You will die, and I will be left alone. I will not know at all what to do. So give me a ship with wares so that I can set out to sea in order to be experienced in commerce." The father gave him a ship with wares, and he went to countries and sold the wares and purchased other wares and was very successful. While he was at sea, he noticed the trees where the emperor's daughter was dwelling.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you know what? Good. I'm sorry, good.
They thought that it was a settlement. They wanted to go there. When they came near, they saw that they were trees. Saw that there were trees. They wanted to go back. Meanwhile, the merchant's son looked in the sea and saw a tree there upon which was the appearance of a human being. He thought that perhaps he was misleading himself, so he told the other men who were there. They too looked and also saw the appearance of a human on a tree. They decided to draw near there. They sent a man with a small boat, and they looked in the sea in order to guide the scout so that he could hit the tree. The emissary went there and saw that sitting there was a human, and he told them. He himself, the merchant's son, went there and saw her sitting there, that is, the emperor's daughter, and he told her to come down. She said to him that she does not want to enter the ship unless he promises that he will not touch her until he arrives home and marries her lawfully. He promised her, and she entered with him into the ship. He saw that she could play musical instruments and speak several languages, and he rejoiced that she chanced upon him. Afterwards, as they began drawing near to his house, she said to him that the proper thing would be that he goes home and informs his father, relatives, and good friends that since he is bringing such a precious woman, they should all come out to greet her, and after that he would know who she is, because previously she had made a condition with him that he should not ask her who she is until after the wedding, at which time he would know who she is. He agreed to this. Further, she said to him, "The proper thing is also that you should inebriate all mariners who operate the ship, to let them know that their merchant is getting wed with such a woman." And he accorded with her. So he took very fine wine that he had on board ship and gave it to them. They got very drunk, and he went home to inform his father and friends. And the sailors were drunk and went out from the ship, and they fell and lay drunk. While they were preparing themselves to go greet her with the entire family, she went and untied the ship from the shore, spread the sails, and was away with the ship. And the entire family came to the ship and found nothing. The merchant was enraged at his son, and the son cried out, "Believe me, I brought a ship with wares." "But they see nothing," he said. But they see nothing. He said to him, "Ask the sailors." So he went to ask them, but they lay drunk. Afterwards, the sailors got up, and he asked them, but they knew nothing at all about what happened to them. They only knew that they had brought a ship with all the aforementioned, but they did not know where it is. The merchant was very angry at his son and banished his son from his home so that he should not appear before him. The son went away wandering about, and she, that is, the emperor's daughter, was going on the sea.
Everybody following? Everybody, you're at sea with this? Good, okay.
The day came to pass when there was a king who had built himself a palace by the sea, for it pleased him there because of the sea air and because the ships go there. And the emperor's daughter was going on the sea and came near to this place of the palace of the king. The king took a look and he saw the ship going without a crew, and no one was there. He thought he was deceiving himself. He ordered his men to look, and they also saw. And she came closer to the palace. She decided, what does she need this palace for? And she started to turn around. The king sent and brought her back from the ship which she had turned around, and brought her into his home. Now this king did not have any wife, because he could not choose for himself, because whoever he wanted did not want him, and vice versa. When the emperor's daughter came to him, she told him to swear to her that he would not touch her until he legally marries her, and he swore to her. She told him that it would be right to not open her ship and not touch it, to just let it stand like that in the sea until the wedding, in order that everyone would then see the vast wares she had brought, so that they should not say that he had taken a woman from the market. He promised her so. So the king wrote to all the countries to all come to the wedding. He built a palace for her sake, and she commanded that they bring her 11 daughters of nobility to be with her. The king ordered, and they sent her 11 daughters of very high noblemen. And they built each one an individual palace, and she also had an individual palace. They would gather unto her, and they would play musical instruments and play with her. Once she told them she would go out with them on the sea. They went with her and were playing there. She told them she would honor them with good wine that she had. She gave them from the wine that was in the ship. They became drunk and fell down and remained lying. She went and unbound the ship, spread out the sails, and fled with the ship. The king and his people took a look and saw the ship was not there, and they were very panicked. The king said, "See to it that you do not tell her suddenly, for she would have great distress, for the king did not know that she herself had fled with the ship. He thought she was in her room. And she might think that the king had given the ship to someone. Rather, they should send her one of the young noblewomen to tell her tactfully." They went to one room and found no one, and likewise in another room. They also did not find anybody. And so on, in all 11 rooms, they found nobody. They decided, the king and his people, to send her an elderly noblewoman at night to tell her. They came to her room and also found nobody, and they were very terrified. Meanwhile, the fathers of the young noblewomen saw that they were not having letters from their daughters. They were sending letters and got no letters back. They personally got up and all went to them and did not find any of their daughters. They are enraged and wanted to send the king to his death, for they were the royal ministers. However, they came to a decision. What is the king guilty of that he should be sent to death? The king transgressed as a victim of circumstance. They agreed to remove him from kingship and drive him out. They deposed him and exiled him, and he went on his way. And the emperor's daughter who had fled was faring with the ship. Later, the young noblewoman awoke and began to play with her again as before, for they were not aware that the ship had already departed from the shore. Then they said to her, "Let's go back home." She answered them, "Let's stay here a bit longer." Afterwards, there arose a storm wind, and they said, "Let's go back home." She informed them that the ship had already long left from the shore. They asked her, "Why have you done this?" She told them she was afraid the ship might be wrecked because of the storm wind, therefore she had to do so. They were faring on the sea. The emperor's daughters with the 11 noblewomen, the emperor's daughter with the 11 noblewomen, and were playing musical instruments, and they came across a palace. The daughters of nobility said to her, "Let's approach the palace," but she did not want to. She said that she also regretted having approached the previous palace of the king who wanted to marry her. Later they saw some kind of island in the sea, and they drew near there. There were 12 pirates there. The pirates wanted to kill them. She asked, "Who is the superior amongst you?" They showed her. She said to him, What do you do?" He told her they were robbers. She said to him, "We too are robbers, only you rob with your might, and we rob with shrewdness, for we are learned in languages and play musical instruments. Therefore, what will you win if you kill us? Better to take us for wives, and you will have great wealth too." And she showed them what was on the ship, for the ship belonged to the trader's son with his great wealth. The pirates agreed to her words. The pirates also showed them their wealth and brought them to all their places. And it was agreed between them that they should not marry them all at one time, but only one after the other. And a selection should be made to give each one such a noblewoman as befits him according to his greatness. Afterwards, she told them that she would honor them with very good wine, which she has on board the ship, which she does not use at all. Only the wine is kept in store by her until God brings her her match. She gave them the wine in 12 goblets and said that all of them should drink to each 12. They drank, got drunk, and collapsed. She called out to the other noblewoman, "Go, and each of you kill your man." They went and they killed off all of them. They found enormous wealth there, such as cannot be found with any king. They decided that they should not take any copper or silver, only gold and precious stones, and they threw out from the ship things which are not so important, and loaded up the entire ship with precious things, with the gold and precious stones that they found there. And they came to a decision to no longer go dressed as women, and they sewed men's clothing for themselves, German style, and went with the ship.
Like this story is being told like in 1805.
In Poland?
It's like in Poland.
So they're like, "Oh, German clothes."
Like this is like highfalutin,
yeah,
modern.
And the day came to pass, and there was a king. The king only had one son, and he had made him a wedding and had transferred the kingdom to him. Once he said to his father he would go on a leisurely trip with his wife on the sea so that she became accustomed to the sea air, lest at some time they would have to flee on the sea. The king's son went with his wife and with the royal ministers and set out on the ship. And they were very merry there and played freely. Later, they said they would all take off their clothes. They did so, and nothing remained on them except their shirts. And they urged everybody who could climb up the mast. The prince climbed up the mast. Meanwhile, the emperor's daughter approached with her ship and saw this ship of the prince with the ministers. Initially, she was afraid of going there, and then she came a bit closer and she saw that they were playing intensely, so she understood that they were not pirates. She began drawing closer. The emperor's daughter announced to her retinue, "I can throw that bald head guy down into the sea," that is, the prince who was climbing up the mast. For the prince had a bald head. They said to her, "How is that possible? We are very far from them." She answered them, "She has a burning lens, and with it she can cast him down." And she decided she would not knock him down until he reaches the very top of the mast, because as long as he was in the middle of the mast, were he to fall, he would fall into the ship. Whereas when he reaches the top, then when he falls, he will fall into the sea. And she waited until he was up on the top of the mast. She took the burning lens and held it facing his brain until it burned his brain. He fell down into the sea. When he fell down, there was a great commotion there on the ship, and they did not know what to do. How could they return home, for the king would die of heartbreak? They decided to go to the ship, and they saw, that is, to the ship of the emperor's daughter. Perhaps there would be some doctor there on board who could give them a solution. They drew close to the ship and told them, namely the people who were on the emperor's daughter's ship, that they should not have any fear whatsoever, for they, the men of the king's ship, would not do anything at all to them. And they asked, "Maybe you have here a doctor who can advise us." And they told the whole story and how the prince had fallen into the sea. The emperor's daughter instructed them to draw him out of the sea. They went and found him and took him out. The emperor's daughter took his pulse, with her hand and said his brain had been burnt. They went and tore open his brain and saw it was as she had said. They were awestruck, that is, it was a great novelty to them how the doctor, that is, the emperor's daughter, had been so correct. and they requested that she go together with them to their home. She would be doctor to the king and be very esteemed by him. She did not want to, and she said that she was not a doctor at all, only she knows such things. Now the people of the prince's ship did not want to return home. The two ships went together. It pleased the royal ministers very much that their queen, that is, the wife of the prince, should take the doctor, that is, the emperor's daughter, who was going dressed as a male, and they thought it was a doctor, for they saw she was exceedingly wise. Therefore, they wanted their queen, who was the wife of the prince who died, to marry the doctor, that is, the emperor's daughter, and he would be their king.
Everybody got it? Everybody's doing good?
Reminds me of Yentl.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the Odyssey. And their old king, that is, the father of the king, they would kill. Only they were ashamed to tell the queen that she should marry a doctor. But the queen, too, was pleased to marry a doctor, only she feared the country, perhaps they would not want him to be king. They came to the decision to make balls, that is, banquets, so that while drinking at the time of merriment, they would be able to talk about it. They made a ball for each one of them on a separate day. When the day came for the ball of the doctor, that is, the emperor's daughter, he gave them of his aforementioned wine that he had, and they got drunk. When they were married, the ministers said, "How beautiful it would be if the queen would marry the doctor." The doctor, that is, the emperor's daughter, replied, It would surely be very beautiful, if only they said this with not a drunken mouth." The queen also replied, "It would be very beautiful for me to marry the doctor, if only the country would agree to it." The doctor repeated, "It would surely be very beautiful if they proposed to this.
If only they proposed.
If only they proposed this with not drunken mouth. Afterward, when they sobered up from their drunkenness, the ministers remembered what they had said and were embarrassed before the queen for having said such things. But they decided, the queen herself had also said it, and the queen too was embarrassed before them, but she decided they themselves had also said it. Meanwhile, they began to talk about it, and so it was agreed they betrothed the queen with the doctor, that is, with the emperor's daughter, whom they thought was a doctor, as mentioned. And they went home to their country. When the country saw them coming, they rejoiced greatly, since it had been a long time since the prince was away with the ship, and they did not know where he was. And the old king had meanwhile died before they arrived. Meanwhile, they noticed that their prince, who was their king, was not there. So I'm a little lost. That's the guy she was loved when she was young, right?
No. This is the prince who of this king, and he died. He was married to the woman that they now want to marry off. The
Oh, right.
You know, the princess, the daughter of the king, of the emperor, she killed him.
Yeah, but I thought we were back to the same family somehow, but I guess
No,
not.
we didn't
All right.
get there yet.
Yeah, okay.
Easy
All right.
killing. Easy.
Yeah.
There's more than one king and more than one queen,
I know,
more than
I
one
know.
emperor in the world.
Where did I leave off? When the country saw them, okay, they rejoiced. Meanwhile, they noticed that their prince, who was their king, was not there. They, that is the country, asked, "Where is our king?" And they told him the whole story, that the prince had been dead now, had long been dead now, and that they had already taken a new king who was accompanying them, that is, the doctor, who was the emperor's daughter. The countrymen were very happy they had received a new king.
So go figure.
The king, that is the emperor's daughter, ordered to announce in all countries that whosoever was present anywhere, foreigner, guest, refugee, or exiled, should all come to his wedding. Not a single one should be absent. They would receive great gifts, and the king, that is the emperor's daughter, also commanded to make fountains all around the city so that anyone who wanted to drink would not have to go away to get a drink, but would be able to find a fountain next to him. And the king, that is the emperor's daughter, also ordered for his picture to be drawn next to every fountain, and to station guards to watch for anyone coming along and looking hard at the picture, that is, the portrait of the king, who was the emperor's daughter, as mentioned. And making a bad face, as someone who looks at something and is shocked or saddened, they should grab him and put him in prison.
Okay.
And this was done. And these three men came along. That is, the first prince, who was the true groom of the emperor's daughter, who had become king there.
I just gotta get changed.
The merchant's son, who had been banished by his father on account of the emperor's daughter, who had fled from him with the ship and all its merchandise. And the deposed king, also on account of him, who had fled from him with the 11 daughters of nobility as mentioned. And each of these three recognized that this was her picture, and they gazed intensely and remembered and became very anguished. They were caught and placed in prison. At the time of the wedding, the king, that is, the emperor's daughter, commanded to bring the captives before him. The three were brought, and she recognized them, but they did not recognize her since she was dressed like a man. The emperor's daughter spoke up and said, "You, king that is the exiled king, who was one of the prisoners, you were deposed on account of the 11 daughters of nobility who were lost. Take back your daughters of nobility. Return home to your country and to your kingdom, because the 11 daughters of nobility were with her here. Your merchant, that is, the first she spoke to the deposed king. Now she turned back to speak to the merchant, that is, the merchant's son. You were banished by your father on account of the ship with its merchandise that was lost from you. Take back your ship with all the merchandise, and for your money being out so long, you now have a much greater wealth on the ship. Many, many fold were more than there was before. For the same ship with all the merchandise belonging to the merchant's son, with which she had fled, was still with her in its entirety. And in addition to this was all the wealth which she had taken from the pirates, which was extraordinary wealth, many, many, many fold more. And you, prince, that is the first prince who was truly her groom, come here and let's go home. They returned home. Amen and amen."
Okay, that's the story.
Hmm.
So what do you think of that?
It sounds, parts of it sound similar to other stories we have done like last year or something. And because I kept thinking back, it's definitely different. It's not the same story, but there are parts that are similar, which makes me think that the authors that you have chosen are right in the same ilk as others, but the stories are different.
Well, this is a Rab Nachman story, so you may be recalling that we had earlier stories of the lost princess earlier on.
Yes.
It has that same kind of fairy tale quality, and a lot of the stories that we have had over the last over a year have had those kinds of like fairy tale elements to them. So yeah, I chose a lot of those kinds of things. Some of them were ancient, and this one is, like I said, about a little over 200 years ago. And of course, Rab Nachman is riffing. He's developing his own little version of one of these kind of folk tales, these fables and fairy tales. So, but he's using them as it ends at the end. We don't usually go amen via amen. We don't usually end that when we hear a Grimm's fairy tale or an Aesop's fables or something like that. He, all the way at the beginning, like I said, of our sessions, when I first introduced one of his stories, he saw these stories as religious messages, right? He saw these stories as spiritual exercises, and he was hoping that people that heard the stories would be moved in their hearts and souls and understand that these are very much not Baba Mices. They're not just fairy tales, but they're actually talking about more profound spiritual realities. So that's the way he believed he was creating these stories for that purpose, and that's the way they're taken in his community. Of course, we're just benefiting from it, but in the Bratslav community, these are sacred texts. These are like studying Gemara or studying Rashi or something like that. This is this is a text that people write commentaries on, and they read it all the time. Yeah, John.
It's interesting that, if you take it as a religious story, then the groom and the bride, you could liken to God and Israel.
Exactly.
And so then you say, the guy who died is like the firstborn, right? The guy she zapped the brain of. Could be like the firstborn, like the Exodus, plague of the firstborn. I'm trying to make sense of it all, actually. the pirates are, I don't know, the people who she stole from the pirates.
And she
Try to-
killed all the pirates.
Did she kill them? Oh, yeah, that's right. She told the women to kill them.
Everybody kills their own, intended.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of, so before we go into the one-to-one kind of, correspondences that you're looking for, and people knock themselves out on this, a lot. But before we get there, let's just, notice that in the true fairy tale fashion, or at least a lot of fairy tales, there's a lot of blood and gore here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of killing. There's a lot of lying, cheating, and stealing, right? There's a lot of duplicity. There's a lot of disguised identities, right? There's all of these, elements that we have quite frequently in those kinds of folk tales are being used here. So when you think about a religious tale with all these people, being murdered and cross-dressing and which is not allowed, right? You're not permitted, according to strict Jewish tradition. Men are men and women are women, and you have to keep it separate. So this woman, she's like this real transgressive personality. She doesn't abide by any rules. She lies to each person to their face. She's duplicitous in so many ways. She makes all these schemes and plans, and and as I said, she's got blood on her hands. She's out there, ruthlessly doing whatever it is that she decides she wants to do. So we have to take that as the grounding for then what we then start saying. So yes, there's this sweet love story, two lovers, they love each other, the parents don't know about it, but then they agree, but one of them doesn't agree, they run away, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, right? There's all that kind of quality, right? And then they finally meet at the end, happy ending. But in order to get to that happy ending, there's a lot
of death.
a lot of real dark stuff that goes on. So we just I want us not to lose sight of that while we try to think of this represents this and this represents that.
Maybe it's not the Jewish people and God. Maybe it's the evil and the good impulse that are getting married.
All right, that's interesting. That's interesting.
That's interesting. But what I found confusing is it seemed like the couple that had studied with the same teacher and promised to get married and wanted to get married, it seemed like they were so close together, but they missed each other. And then the ramifications of how they got back, and I'm not even sure that they got back together at the end.
They did.
They did.
Why not? That's the last line of the story.
Then why did go through? I guess he wrote but why go through all this turmoil and death and?
Because it's fun.
Yeah, right.
That's what happened. What do you mean? All he's telling you is what happened. He said that's what happened. Let's start from the beginning. You've got two rulers. One is an emperor. One is a king. Now, the emperor sounds like a little higher on the royal hierarchy than a king. And the emperor has no children, very biblical, right? The idea of barrenness is a big problem. We've had it actually also in Rav Nachman's stories also. And the king has no children. Then finally they're blessed with children. And they had already made a promise to each other, right? That if they have, by coincidence, one a boy and one a girl, they'll marry them off to each other. Right, so it's already from the beginning. To Carol's point, it seems like it's smooth sailing, to borrow a little metaphor from this story, when it's no smooth sailing, but it should be smooth sailing. But then what happens? Then something gets in the way, right? And the emperor is not so sure that this young man is worthy of his daughter. So he puts him to a test. Right, he wants to see, are you really worthy? And we don't see whether the groom let's call him that, whether the prince can pass the test or not. What does he do instead?
He studies.
No. What does he do instead? He runs away with the bride. He says, I can see that your father really doesn't like me that much. He's putting me to the test. So instead, let's go off by ourselves. So they go off by themselves. They elope, so to speak. But then they lose each other, right? They fall asleep. They forget the ring. All of these very human kinds of frailties that we've encountered also in other places. And as a result, then what happens? Then we start looking for each other. They go off in opposite directions, right? He goes off into a settled area. She wants to stay by the ocean. She wants to stay by the last place that they were before they got lost to each other. And then, of course, the rest of the story keeps on unfolding. But that's the beginning of it. The beginning of it is that there are these obstacles, some of which are put up by at least one of the parents, and some of which are put up by their own negligence or their own lack of faith in what could happen, right? So there's what should be a beautiful, love match ends up getting screwed up in from one end, from one side or from the other side. Yeah, Carol.
It would be interesting if you look at it, if he had taken a different tact, Nachman had taken a different tact, where the couple eloped, they did get married, and then the fallout from what they did and how the story might have gone at that point. But
That's
he didn't take
story.
that tact.
That's another story.
Yeah.
That's for you to write that next story. So,
No way.
But this is this story, right? So what happens? Yeah.
I was at this playwright festival that I did for a few years, which was great when I was younger. And it was National Playwrights Festivals for playwrights. We got 25 plays very simply on their feet. And then we'd have these group sessions where we discussed critique and things like that. But the ground rule, we were absolutely forbidden from ever saying, what if this happened or that happened? And they would say exact same thing. That's your play. We're talking about his play or her play.
Okay, it was a thought.
No, it's just interesting that it's
a tantalizing thought, but it's a thought for another work.
Yeah.
A thought for another story.
Yeah.
Besides, Rabbi, there's so many stories you might find one that sort of goes along that line by another author.
That's right. So, or even by Rav Nachman.
It's possible.
I mean, in Yiddish, there's a phrase, akasha famaisa. Akasha famaisa means you're asking a question about something that happened. If it happened, it happened. You can't ask a question.
Right.
That's what happened. So when it comes to stories, that's what happened. Take the story, take what happened as what happened, and then deal with it. So, but the who remembers what we basically are following? Which of the two characters, the groom and the bride? Which of the two characters are we really following?
The bride.
The bride.
She's the main focus of this whole story. The groom.
And she's badass.
She is one tough cookie.
She is a badass.
Mess with her. Do not mess with her. And even if you don't mess with her, you might get your comeuppance. So so the groom just has his own, what basically can we summarize? I'm not so sure myself if I could summarize it. What happens to the groom during this whole story? He's just moping around. He's just
he's passive. He's passive.
Languishing. He's going, I lost my true love. What's going to happen? What's going to be? But meanwhile, the princess has all of these amazing adventures. Right? So let's just also remark that this is an upending, again, of traditional Jewish stories, right? We're always telling the stories about the men.
Right.
Now, I've chosen many stories where the woman has an important role and an active role, and maybe even a kind of a revolutionary role. And of course, it's not just, they're there, so I can choose them. So there's this counter tradition within our folk, stories that sort of makes up for the fact that in general, it's the men that get all all the attention and all the honor.
But even in the Torah, it's like the women actually make stuff happen all the time. They're in some ways, they're the ones that make things happen. Like I'm thinking of the camels at the well and the saving of Moses, and it's the women. The
Right.
women are the ones.
Absolutely.
The woman
So-
behind the
so
man.
It's the
No,
men
it's
that-
a more active role in a very profound way than just thinking.
Mm.
right. But who tells that story? The men. Right. And then we acknowledge every once in a while that but when we look before a generation ago, it's about a generation now. Generation ago, no Jew who was trying to pray the traditional or semi-traditional prayers ever mentioned the matriarchs in the prayers. You didn't do it.
But
There's the
even
text. There's the
even
text. You know,
even
we
in a
know-
male written history, right? The women are the ones that make the covenant continue over and over and over
I'm
again.
not arguing that that's not true. I'm saying
Yeah.
that Torah actually does tell us these stories, but the way that we filter it when we have our stories, it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Right.
Period. Right. So because we're the guys, you know, present half of this present company, you know, excluded. Where the guys have been always telling the story and focusing on that. Here's this guy, Rav Nachman. He's a traditional guy. And he's telling the story and focusing on this, you know, I don't know that he would like the term badass heroine, but he created it. You know, he makes this person be who she is. So who is she? Who is she? Who is the daughter of the emperor? So if we have a familiarity, of course, with Rav Nachman's own background.
See you later.
See you later. So if we have a familiarity with Rav Nachman's own background, he comes out of the chassidic world, the mystical Jewish world, the traditional Jewish world. If we talk about the emperor, who is the king of kings, right? That's what an emperor is. An emperor is someone who rules many other kingdoms. So he is the king of all the kings. When we sing Aleinu, it's on us to praise the creator of everything, right? So we bow down and we bend the knee, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, before the king who is the king of all the kings. So that's how we talk about God. When we do Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Mi Melech Malchei Amlachim. You angels, where are you coming from? You're coming from the king who is the king of all the kings. So the emperor could be God. You know, back to now trying to, you know, fill out a little bit of what John was saying before. But it's not the groom that's God, right? Which we would maybe, you know, fall into in an automatic way. It's the bride's father who's God. And she is his daughter. She is Shechina. Right? She is the feminine godly presence. And then the groom could be Israel. And then all of this story is about the vicissitudes of Israel and the Shekhinah were meant for each other. But then God was saying, are you really worthy of Shekhinah? Show me that you're really worthy of Shekhinah. And what do? We worship a golden calf. We refuse to go into the land of Israel. We complain about all kinds of stuff. You know, so we don't have, you know, the fortitude, the spiritual, you know, faith and fortitude to hold on to this, to just prove our mettle, you know, and then be able to just go and marry the Shekhinah. So no, we're going to do it our way. And of course, when we do it our way, we mess up. And then this story is about how Shekhinah never gives up that commitment to that first promise. She's in love with the groom. She will not have anybody else, but she knows that she is vulnerable, right? She knows that this other person is going to take her and ravish her if he gets his way. And she has to be this warrior woman. There's a kind of a character like that in some cultures, right? Where she has to be more of a man than a man in order to protect herself. And Shekhinah then becomes somebody not just warm and fuzzy and romantic and sweet, she becomes terrifying, right? She has to figure out somehow how to live in a world that is a violent world of competition, of cutthroat ruthlessness, until such time as all the restitution and all the justice can be put back in its proper place, right? That's what she does at the end. But, meanwhile, as we noticed, a lot of people have to be gotten out of the way. A lot of people who themselves, if they had their druthers, would countermand the destiny that these two lovers were supposed to fulfill for their own sake, for their own desire. They would want to have it their way, but it's not meant to be their way. It's meant to be this other kind of way. So I can't go through one by one each of the different actions and episodes and say this stands for this and this stands for this. As I said, there is a whole literature, although the beginning of I have an edition, which has some commentaries on these stories, and it begins by saying this is such a deep story, we have no idea how to explain it. That's how the Breslov community publishes its commentary first, and it says, but maybe we can sort of speculate a little bit about this and a little bit about that. Yeah, Josie.
Is this supposed to be a parable of Jewish history?
Exactly.
Through the ages and the
Right.
people who oppose us, and we're
Right. And with the end at the end, with the ending being the happy ending, but then we will get together and we'll be restored to each other. Amen via amen. Right? And then that the happy ending will come about at the end. Right? So yes, that's the promise. Okay, anybody else? Any other comments?
No,
Okay, so I'm going to take this opportunity to say, first of all, thank you to all of you steadfast stalwarts who have been to so many of these sessions.
The salties.
Yeah, the saltine. Right. So, and I mentioned to Carol early before everybody came on, we're going to now take a hiatus. And if you want to, get into some interesting kosher salt, then join the watch party for The Good Place. So that'll be, a kind of a substitute for this. But we're not going to be meeting anymore for the rest of the summer. We'll see what happens after the holidays, how the world looks. But it's been a real pleasure for me to find the stories, share the stories, read them together with you, listen to you. So thank you, Yasher Koach.
thank you very much.
and it's been
Maybe
fun
we
for
can plan
everybody.
on doing something like this once things get back to whatever the new normal is going to be.
We'll see.
But because it is interesting.
terrific.
Yeah, they're great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yasher
Rabbi.
Koach. Take
Yasher
care.
Thank you. Yasher Koach.
Bye.
Bye-bye.